Hello, Hauger history students. We're going to cover the Ottoman Empire today, after which I do this presentation. You will have time to work on your presentations of your empire from the Gunpowder Empires. Let's get right into it and discuss how we observe history. This is a veery. This little bird, kind of cute, right? This bird travels 4,000 miles and adjusts its nesting and migratory period based on how severe tropical storms are in the southeastern United States. That's right, this bird knows whether or not hurricanes are going to be extremely deadly and will adjust and go to Brazil depending on when those storms are coming. If that bird can learn about storms in nature and be that in tune, then we can learn a lot about empires and the way that they affect the future, and the way that force and gunpowder changed the way that people conquered the world. So here's the Ottoman Empire and how large it was for 1300 to 1481. A few different major battles and confrontations enabled them to grab a lot of land. And around 1300, the Muslim Turks of Anatolia, which is like Turkey, were unified and formed the Ottoman Empire. The name came from the early leader Osman. That's a test question. So around 1300, the Muslim Turks of Anatolia were unified and formed the Ottoman Empire. There'll be a video too later, so if you want to pause later and get these notes in a more, on your own time frame, that will be great too. But this was one of the great empires of the world. They used muskets and cannons. Those two bold words are also a likely test question for you to fill in the blank, to form a powerful army and expand their territory. So imagine having a sword and being pretty good with that sword and being well trained and having won lots of battles on battlefield with hand-to-hand combat, being probably pretty good at some physical wrestling. But then this thing rolls up to your castle and you're like, oh no. Hey, what's that? That looks like trouble. Yeah, there goes the Middle Ages. There go the early castle and feudal empires. This is going to basically break down all the structures of society and any structure that you're living in at the time, too. Amazing. Here's another shot of how are you going to fight with swords when now there are guns with you on the battlefield. This is that rare time in world history where people with swords are trying to fight people with muskets, and I think you know who won. They also, whenever they conquered an area, would take the captured people and turn them into elite soldiers for themselves. So now it's kind of like Pokemon. Every time you conquer and capture, it's part of your army now. Every time you take over a city, these janissaries would join you or be killed. So these soldier slaves would be on to the next town. So every time you won, like a mobile app battle game, you're now strengthening your army and making yourself even more scary and devastating. Janissaries came from all the territories that the Turks conquered. Bosnians, Bulgarians, Greeks, Serbians, Albanians, by blood and Christianity, were taken from their homes at an early age, forced to convert to Islam, and trained to be soldiers. Such Janissaries. Very worthwhile vocab term. I'd like you to know it, have it down. Likely to come up on an assessment not too far away from today. The Byzantine Empire, which had been around for 1,000 years, ended because of these muskets, guns, and cannons, and the Ottoman Empire began. So one invention, basically variations on the gunpowder invention, destroyed entire empires. Wow, 1,000 years of progress, done. Constantinople fell to the Turks in 1453, and at its height, the Ottoman Empire was as large as the Roman Empire. Another test question. See that hint ticket there? Roman Reigns knows that that's a lot of power and force. And whatever the world thinks about Roman Reigns, he's a conqueror. And so were the Ottoman Turks. By the late 1600s, the Ottomans expanded to the Middle East, some of northern Africa, and became a large part of Eastern Europe as well. So a huge chunk of southern Europe, northern Africa, and Eastern Asia also became taken over by these Ottomans. Here's another picture. Wherever they went, they often burned books, history, culture, and art. So 1,000 years worth of carefully painted, written documents, poetry, research destroyed so that the Ottomans could be in charge. Book burning is very common in world history. China's Qin dynasty, the obliteration of Baghdad in 1258, the destruction of Aztec by the Quetzalcoatl, the burning of Maya codices. Wow, so many times in history, the invading force thinks they're so superior and they want to wipe out any resistance or any worship of old culture or identity. So they burned everything that they could in these different instances. And that's what it looks like. If that doesn't look significant to you, think about Greek, Syrian, Armenian, Georgian, Jewish, Hellenized, Asiatic tribes, all with their carefully written histories and discoveries being burned and destroyed. Ottoman kings and empires, or emperors, were called sultans, and they governed with absolute power. If you couldn't tell by all the book burning stuff, their orders and their words carried a lot of weight. So there's another test question for you, and there are some of the sultans of the Ottoman Empire. The greatest was Suleiman the Magnificent, and I don't know if it's because he can get away with wearing that hat without being killed, or with no one making fun of his extremely tiny donut hands, or his large body to hand ratio. That's like that to me looks like a 30-to-1 ratio. When I put my hand up, which I'm doing now, you could do this. Put your hand up like to your stomach, right? I would say like I could get 4 hands, maybe like 2 hands across, like 4 hands around. He looks like he needs to go about 45 hands. I don't know. Anyway, you couldn't make fun of him back then because he had so much power in 1520. And he was the most powerful king in the world in the mid-1500s. That's why we learned about him. Can you imagine someone so powerful that 500 years later, we still acknowledge their power? Oh, wow, that's nuts, right? He was, though, someone who was able to accomplish a lot. He earned the title of lawgiver because he simplified the laws of his empire, promoted science and architecture. He had people build schools, libraries, mosques, and bridges. So he wasn't just a punisher. He also provided a lot of resources. The Ottoman Empire and Suleiman had an efficient civil service, and people knew him as phenomenal. And that is a huge title to wear that only AJ Styles currently can in WWE. He has a lot of different accomplishments, and I'd like you to watch this video if you can write down the title. 15 things you didn't know about Suleiman the Magnificent. And if you want, we can watch it together. I just want to make sure I give you time to ask questions so that I can answer them. Put any questions you have in the chat box. On a test, I want you to know 3 of his accomplishments. I already outlined about 5, but we'll watch this video if you'd like. Just put that in the comment feature. We'll come back to it. Under Suleiman, the empire reached an expansive empire that you see on the screen, from the Mediterranean Sea to the Silk Road going into China. So you could get goods from China and give them to all of Europe, which meant you could make a lot of money on taxes and trade routes. Anyone that used trade routes could make money. And this is just like Amazon and Apple today. Apple reported that its App Store generated over $26 billion in revenue in 2017. That's up 30%. And anything that I sell, whether it's an app or a book I wrote or a podcast or video, Apple and Amazon make 30 cents off of every dollar. Every app that you buy, everything, even Netflix subscriptions, if you subscribe through Amazon or if you subscribe to Prime or if you buy Netflix through the app on the Apple Store, they're going to get 30% cut. So they make money on everyone that uses their service. And back then, if anyone uses their trade routes, the Ottoman Empire would gain money from that too. It's crazy. Facebook's going to access your data every time you use Instagram. If Microsoft buys TikTok, it'll be the same. They know your name, your email address, when you go online, who you like to talk to, when, where you go on the internet, so they can serve you ads back on Facebook when you're logged in or out. They use data tracking. There's money being made all over, and that's why these companies are worth billions of dollars, and that's why this empire was so powerful until they were stopped by the Holy Roman Empire. That would be the limit of the Ottomans' power in Europe. After they tried to take over Vienna, they tried to go too fast, too far, and a Roman Reigns Superman punch was over. And that's where we'll stop. And so you can ask me questions about this empire. We can watch that video together. Let's jump right back in. Great job. And let's dive back in together.